Lena Marie Hoffman learned about suffering the way most children learn about Santa Claus, through stories told by the women who raised her. Born on a February morning in 1987 in the small Bavarian town of Rosenheim, she was the youngest of 3 daughters in a household where the word divorce was spoken in whispers, if at all. Her father, Klaus Hoffmann, worked at the BMW plant in Munich, commuting 2 hours each way, returning home too exhausted for conversation. Her mother, Margit, managed the household with the precision of a military operation and the faith of a medieval saint. The Hoffmann family attended St. Nicolaus Church every Sunday without exception. Margit wore the same navy dress she had worn for 15 years, and Klaus nodded through sermons he barely heard. Lena sang in the children's choir from age 7, her voice blending with others in hymns about endurance and sacrifice. The priest spoke often about the sanctity of marriage, about wives who stood by difficult husbands, about the virtue of patience. These weren't suggestions. They were commandments, absorbed into Lena's understanding of what it meant to be a woman. Her older sisters, Britta and Claudia, were practical and sharp-edged, built for survival in ways Lena never mastered. Lena was different. She collected injured animals and cried when she couldn't save them. She stayed up all night with sick classmates, brought soup to elderly neighbors, remembered everyone's birthday. Her teachers called it empathy. Her mother called it weakness disguised as kindness. Margit would say, her lips pressed thin, that Lena needed to develop a thicker skin or the world would devour her. When Lena was 14, her Aunt Hilda left her husband after 23 years of marriage. The family gathering that followed was electric with judgment. Grandmother Inga sat at the head of the table and said the words Lena would never forget. She gave up too easily. A real woman works harder. Lena wrote in her diary that night in purple ink, just 2 sentences that would become her prison. I will never be weak like Aunt Hilda. When I marry, I will make it work no matter what. Lena graduated from secondary school in 2006, with grades good enough for university, but a calling that felt larger than academics. She wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to spend her life easing pain, holding hands, making people feel less alone in their suffering. The Klinikum Rosenheim hired her after she completed her training in 2009, and for 2 years she worked pediatric night shifts, singing softly to frightened children, explaining procedures in simple German, staying late when parents needed someone to talk to. Her supervisor wrote in her evaluation that Lena Hoffman treated every patient like family. But Lena's kindness had a shadow side she couldn't see. She never asked for help herself. Asking meant admitting failure, and failure meant disappointing the women who had raised her to be strong. She dated occasionally, but never seriously. One boyfriend in nursing school who was kind but forgettable. A few first dates that went nowhere. She wasn't desperate. She was simply waiting for someone who would appreciate everything she had to offer. Someone who would build a life with her that looked like her parents' life. Stable, faithful, anchored in something larger than individual happiness. In the spring of 2011, an opportunity emerged that felt like destiny. The Klinikum München-Schwabing was hiring for their emergency department, and the salary was nearly double what she earned in Rosenheim. Lena accepted the position without hesitation, packed her small apartment into boxes, and moved to Munich with her mother's tears and her father's gruff approval. She found a modest flat in Milbertshofen, a working-class neighborhood where rent was manageable, and the U-Bahn could take her anywhere she needed to go. The distance from Rosenheim was only an hour by train, but it felt like crossing into a different country. For the first time in her life, Lena was truly alone. She told herself this was independence. What she didn't realize was that isolation makes you visible to predators in ways that community never does. The loneliness crept in slowly. In Rosenheim, she could call her mother and be at the house in 20 minutes. She could meet her sisters for coffee, attend Mass at St. Nicholas, feel the safety net of people who had known her since birth. In Munich, her co-workers were friendly but busy. Her neighbors waved but didn't linger. She tried a new church but couldn't find the same sense of belonging. Lena worked extra shifts to fill the emptiness, telling herself she was building her career when really she was just avoiding the silence of her apartment. September 2011 arrived with the last warmth of summer, and the first cool breath of autumn. A colleague invited Lena to a birthday party in Schwabing, and she almost declined. She had laundry to do, groceries to buy, sleep to catch up on. But something made her say yes. Maybe loneliness, maybe the desire to feel normal for a few hours, maybe fate, if you believe in such things. The party was in a small beer garden, music playing from portable speakers, the smell of grilled bratwurst hanging in the air. Lena arrived knowing only the co-worker who had invited her, feeling awkward in the way you feel at gatherings where everyone else has history you're not part of. She got a beer she wouldn't finish, found a spot in the shade, and prepared to make small talk until she could politely leave. That's when she saw him. Or rather, that's when Stefan Richter saw her. He was standing near the grill with a beer in his hand, and a smile that seemed designed to make women feel like the only person in the world. He was handsome in a rough way, with broad shoulders and the kind of easy confidence that made you lean in closer. He walked toward her like he'd been waiting for her to arrive, introduced himself with a handshake that lasted just a beat too long, and asked her questions that made her feel seen for the first time in months. He wanted to know about her work, her family, her dreams. He listened when she talked. Really listened. By the time the sun set, they had been talking for 3 hours, and Lena hadn't thought about her loneliness once. Stefan asked for her number before she left. She gave it without hesitation, drove home smiling, not knowing that the charming stranger at the beer garden had already begun calculating how to isolate her completely. The courtship had begun, and Lena was walking straight into a trap that would take her 7 years to escape. Stefan Richter called Lena the morning after the party, before she had even finished her coffee. His voice was warm, casual, asking if she wanted to meet for breakfast. She said yes, surprised by how quickly he had reached out, flattered by the attention. That breakfast became lunch the next day, which became dinner 3 days later. Within 2 weeks, Stefan had woven himself into every empty space in her life. He sent good morning texts before her alarm went off, and good night messages after she fell asleep. He showed up at the hospital with flowers for no reason, brought her lunch when she mentioned she had forgotten to pack one. Her co-workers teased her about the handsome man who kept appearing in the lobby. Lena smiled and said she thought she might be falling in love. What she didn't recognize was that Stefan wasn't courting her. He was studying her, learning her weaknesses, identifying the exact shape of the hole in her life that he could fill completely. Stefan worked as an electrician, he told her, installing systems in office buildings across Munich. He was skilled with his hands, he said, and took pride in his work. He talked about his childhood in Augsburg, about his father who had died when Stefan was 19, about how hard it had been to lose him. He presented himself as wounded but recovering, honest but vulnerable. Lena felt privileged to be trusted with these confidences. She didn't know that every detail was carefully selected to make her feel needed. By November, 3 months into the relationship, the questions started. Stefan wanted to know about the doctors she worked with. Were any of them single? Did they flirt with her? There was one doctor, a man named Dr. Werner, who was 62 and married with grandchildren, and Stefan asked about him specifically. Lena laughed and reassured him, but she noticed the question. She filed it away. She interpreted his concern as protectiveness, his jealousy as love. When Lena made plans to have dinner with a nursing school friend, Stefan's face fell. He said he had been planning a surprise for them that evening, that he had been looking forward to it all week. Lena apologized and canceled on her friend. This became a pattern. Every time she tried to maintain a relationship outside of Stefan, something would come up. He never forbade her from seeing anyone. He just made it easier to choose him, and Lena kept choosing him, not realizing she was slowly losing everyone else. In December, Stefan met the Hoffman family. Lena brought him to Rosenheim for Sunday dinner, nervous about how her parents would react. Stefan arrived with flowers for Margit and a bottle of good whiskey for Klaus. He complimented the house, asked Klaus about his work at BMW, helped clear the table without being asked. By the end of the evening, Margit was telling her bridge club that Lena had found a good man. but Klaus pulled Lena aside before they left and said something she would remember years later. He said Stefan smiles too much. Margit waved him off. She said Stefan was just nervous that Klaus was being overprotective because Lena was his youngest. The sisters had their own concerns. Britta noticed that Lena checked her phone constantly, even at the dinner table. Claudia noticed the way Lena looked at Stefan before answering simple questions, like she was checking for approval. After Lena and Stefan left, the sisters discussed it quietly in the kitchen, but neither said anything to Lena directly. They didn't want to cause problems. They reasoned that if something was really wrong, Lena would say something. On Christmas Eve, after midnight mass at St. Nicholas, Stefan dropped to one knee in front of the Hoffman family. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life taking care of Lena, that she was everything he had ever wanted. Lena said yes before he finished asking. Margit cried. The sisters applauded. Klaus shook Stefan's hand and said quietly, so only Stefan could hear, "If she loves you, I won't stand in the way. But you take care of her." That night, Lena wrote in her journal that she was going to be a wife, that she was going to have everything she had ever dreamed of. The engagement ring glittered in the lamplight. It felt like a promise. It was actually the first link in a chain. The wedding took place on June 15, 2012 at St. Nicholas Church in Rosenheim. White roses lined every pew, and sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting colored light across the wooden floor. 130 guests filled the church, family, friends, nursing colleagues who had known Lena since her training days. Lena walked down the aisle on her father's arm, wearing a simple white dress she had found at a second-hand shop in Schwabing. Klaus's grip on her elbow was firm, protective, reluctant. When they reached the altar and he placed her hand in Stefan's, he didn't smile. The vows were traditional. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Lena spoke these promises with her whole heart, believing she was entering a partnership blessed by God. Stefan heard them differently. To him, for better or worse, sounded like a guarantee she would never leave. They honeymooned in the Austrian Alps, 7 days in a small guest house near Innsbruck. Stefan was attentive and romantic, holding her hand during mountain walks, surprising her with breakfast in bed, making love to her like she was something precious. Lena wrote in her journal that it was the happiest week of her life. She wrote that she had married her best friend, that nothing could touch them now. After the honeymoon, they returned to the apartment they would share in Milbertshofen. Stefan had convinced Lena it made more sense to live closer to his work, since his hours were less predictable than hers. The two-bedroom flat was modest, but comfortable, with a spare room they talked about turning into a nursery someday. Lena imagined birthday parties and Christmas mornings, the ordinary miracles of family life. The first months were what people call the honeymoon phase. Stefan went to work and came home and helped with dinner. They watched television together, talked about having children, about buying a house eventually. Lena believed this was how marriage was supposed to feel: comfortable, stable, safe. But even during this period, there were signs she didn't recognize as warnings. Stefan's drinking increased gradually, from weekend beers to nightly sessions. He became irritable when Lena questioned expenses, defensive when she mentioned credit card bills. He made comments about her appearance that felt like criticisms disguised as concern. "You look tired. Are you eating too much? That uniform doesn't fit like it used to." The first physical violence came on a December night after a Christmas party at Stefan's company. He had drunk more than Lena had ever seen, and on the drive home she suggested gently that maybe he should slow down at the next gathering. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. His face changed in a way she had never seen before, warmth draining out like water down a sink. He said, "Don't tell me what to do." His voice was flat, cold, terrifying. He said, "You sound like my mother." At home, Stefan grabbed her arm before she could remove her coat, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. He shoved her against the hallway wall, his face inches from hers, his breath sour with alcohol. He said, "Don't ever embarrass me like that again." Then he let go and walked away like nothing had happened. Lena stood in the hallway for 20 minutes, shaking, unable to move. The next morning brought flowers and tears and apologies. Stefan sat beside her in bed crying, holding her hands, promising it would never happen again. He blamed the alcohol. He blamed work stress. He blamed himself with such convincing remorse that Lena felt guilty for being afraid. She forgave him because that's what wives did. She forgave him because her mother had taught her that men have struggles and women have patience. She forgave him because the alternative was admitting she had made a terrible mistake. The cycle was established. What came next would be worse. Lena discovered she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in August 2013, sitting in the staff bathroom at Klinikum München-Schwabing with a test stick in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight. She stared at them for 10 minutes, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. A baby would change everything. A baby would give Stefan something to focus on besides his anger. A baby would make him the man she had fallen in love with at that beer garden 2 years ago. She planned the announcement carefully, buying a small gift box and placing the test inside on tissue paper. When Stefan came home from work, she was waiting on the sofa with the box in her lap and her heart pounding. He opened it without understanding at first, then looked at the test, then at Lena, and his face transformed into something she hadn't seen in months. Pure joy. He dropped to his knees and buried his face in her lap, crying, saying he was going to be a father, that he would be better than his own father had been. That night, Lena called Margit with the news. Her mother screamed so loud Lena had to hold the phone away from her ear. The sisters were called next, and plans began immediately. Nursery colors, baby names, family celebrations. For the first time in a year, Lena felt like herself again. The violence had been bad, yes, but it was behind them now. The baby would heal everything. By October, when Lena was 14 weeks along, the violence had not only returned but intensified. Stefan came home drunk one evening, angrier than usual about something at work. He asked where she had been that afternoon. She told him the truth. She had attended a colleague's baby shower. She hadn't mentioned it beforehand because it was last minute, and she didn't think he would mind. His face went cold. Before she could explain further, he was moving toward her. He blocked the doorway when she tried to leave. He grabbed her shoulders and shoved her against the wall. Then he struck her side, an open-handed blow that landed on her ribs and sent her stumbling. She fell, hit her hip on the dresser, and lay on the floor with her arms wrapped around her stomach, protecting the baby while Stefan stood over her with his fist still raised. He stopped. He looked at his hand like he didn't recognize it. Then came the apologies, the tears, the promises. Lena checked for bleeding and found none. She convinced herself the baby was fine. When she saw her obstetrician the following week, she mentioned hip pain from a fall and nothing more. Dr. Schneider noted the bruising and asked gently if Lena felt safe at home. Lena smiled and said yes. She woke at 3 in the morning on a November night with a pain in her abdomen that felt like tearing. She lay still, hoping it would pass, but when she stood up, she felt warmth running down her thighs. Blood. So much blood. Stefan drove her to the hospital while she sat in the passenger seat pressing her hands against her belly, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening. By the time the ultrasound wand pressed against her stomach, Lena already knew. There was no heartbeat. The baby was gone. Spontaneous miscarriage at 16 weeks. Medical cause unknown. Lena doesn't remember much about the hours that followed. She remembers fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells and Stefan holding her hand while she stared at the ceiling. The doctor said these things happen, that it wasn't anyone's fault, that she could try again. Lena thought she would never be ready. Margit arrived the next day and stayed for a week. She noticed the bruises on Lena's arms, the way she flinched at sudden movements. She asked once if everything was okay. Lena said yes. Stefan was perfect during those days. Gentle, heartbroken, attentive. By the time Margit left, Lena had convinced herself the miscarriage was bad luck, nothing more. She didn't connect the assault 2 weeks earlier to the loss. She couldn't afford to make that connection. Lena discovered she was pregnant again in March 2014, and her first emotion was not joy, but fear. She stared at the positive test in her bathroom with her heart racing and her hands trembling, terrified of what this pregnancy might bring. She waited 3 days before telling Stefan, building up courage, praying this time would be different. When she finally told him, his response was possessive rather than celebratory. He said, "This time we do everything right." He said it like the first miscarriage had been her fault. He made rules immediately. Lena would reduce her hospital hours. Lena would eat what he told her to eat. Lena would not do anything to risk this pregnancy. She went from full-time to part-time, which meant less money and more dependence on Stefan. The financial strain made him angry, even though he was the one who demanded she cut back. The violence during this pregnancy was worse. In the 8th week, they argued about bills. The argument ended with Lena on the floor and Stefan's boot connecting with her lower back. She didn't go to the hospital. In the 11th week, Stefan threw a glass that shattered against the wall inches from her head. In the 13th week, he grabbed her throat and squeezed for 3 seconds before releasing. Britta drove to Munich in May without warning, having not heard from Lena in 3 weeks. When Lena answered the door, Britta understood everything. Her sister's lip was swollen, split at the corner. Bruises covered her arms like rotting fruit. Lena's eyes were empty, dull, the eyes of someone who had stopped hoping for rescue. Britta stepped inside and said, "Lena, what is happening to you?" Lena tried the old excuse about being clumsy. Britta grabbed her hands and said, "He's hitting you. You need to leave right now. Pack a bag and come home." Lena pulled away. Her voice cracked when she spoke. She said Britta didn't understand their marriage, that Stefan was under pressure, that she was pregnant and couldn't just leave, that this was her family. When Britta threatened to call the police, Lena's response stopped her cold. She said, "If you do that, I'll never speak to you again." Britta left, sat in her car crying for 20 minutes before she could drive. She called Margit and told her everything. Margit said, "Give her time." 2 months later, in July 2014, Lena lost the second baby. She woke hemorrhaging, and by the time they reached the hospital, she had lost too much blood. Dr. Schneider treated her again, documented bruising again, asked if she was safe at home again. Lena said yes again. The third pregnancy began in February 2015. Lena looked at the positive test with flat expression, the emotional numbness that was the only way she knew to survive. Stefan convinced her to quit her job entirely. He said the baby needed her home full-time, that working was too risky. Lena didn't argue. She signed resignation papers and walked out of Klinikum München-Schwabing for the last time, leaving behind her income, her independence, and the last people who might have noticed what was happening to her. The violence reached its peak. In the 6th week, Stefan punched her stomach during an argument. In the 9th week, he kicked her while she lay in bed. In the 12th week, he beat her so badly she couldn't leave the apartment for a week. September 2015 arrived with late summer heat. Lena was 20 weeks pregnant, far enough along to feel movement. But she had known for days something was wrong. Cramping that wouldn't stop, bleeding. A deep feeling that the life inside her was slipping away. By the time they reached the hospital, there was no heartbeat, but this time tissue remained in her uterus. Within hours, infection spread, septic miscarriage, her fever spiked, her blood pressure dropped. Dr. Schneider tried everything, but the infection was too aggressive. The walls of Lena's uterus had been weakened by years of trauma. There was only one way to save her life: emergency hysterectomy. When Lena woke in recovery, a nurse explained what had happened. "They had to remove your uterus. You'll never be able to have children." Lena's first words were directed at Stefan. She looked at him and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't give you a child." The woman who returned to the Milbertshofen apartment after the hysterectomy was not the same woman who had walked down the aisle at St. Nikolaus 4 years earlier. Lena Richter had been hollowed out, emptied like a vessel. Doctors diagnosed major depressive disorder and prescribed medication. But pills couldn't treat the real cause of her suffering. She dropped 20 pounds in 3 months. She slept 14 hours a day, escaping into unconsciousness. She stopped leaving the apartment except when absolutely necessary. She stopped answering when Margit called. She became a ghost, haunting her own home. Stefan's abuse evolved. Physical violence decreased because there was no need for it anymore. Lena was too broken to resist. Instead, psychological torture intensified. He called her worthless, pathetic, not even a real woman anymore. He told her no one else would want her, that she was damaged goods. The cruelest words came at night when Stefan was drunk. He said he should have married someone who could give him a family, asked what the point was of being married to her now. Lena's closest friend since nursing school was Katrin Weber, who had been her study partner, her confidant, her maid of honor at the wedding. Katrin visited more frequently than anyone after the hysterectomy, bringing food and company. She encouraged Lena to return to work, to see a therapist, to do something beyond existing. Stefan tolerated Katrin's presence, even seemed to welcome it. He was charming when she visited, helpful and attentive. Katrin thought maybe the marriage wasn't as bad as Lena's depression suggested. What Lena didn't know was that Stefan had started texting Katrin in early 2016. Casual messages at first, asking about Lena's mental state. He told Katrin he was worried, that Lena was pulling away, that he didn't know how to help. The messages became more frequent, more personal. Stefan shared his struggles, painting himself as a victim. He said Lena was cold and distant, that she blamed him for things beyond his control. Katrin found herself feeling sorry for him. The affair began in June 2016. They met at hotels while Lena slept away the hours in the apartment. Unaware, Stefan filed for divorce in spring 2017. He told Lena one evening that he wanted out, that the marriage wasn't working. Lena begged. She reminded him of their vows. Stefan's response cut through every defense she had left. He said, "You can't give me what I need. What's the point?" The divorce was finalized in August 2017. Stefan shook her hand like a business associate and said, "Good luck, Lena." Then he drove to Katrin's apartment where he had been spending most nights for months. Lena discovered the affair in September. She saw a photograph on social media, a mutual friend's post from a restaurant. In the background, almost obscured, she saw Stefan and Katrin together, intimate in a way that revealed everything. Lena called Katrin's phone. No answer. She drove to Katrin's building and saw Stefan's van in the parking lot. She sat in her car for 30 minutes watching. The betrayal was complete. Her husband of 7 years and her best friend of 12. The wedding announcement came in March 2018. Stefan and Katrin had married in a courthouse ceremony. The pregnancy announcement came in December. Katrin posted a photograph holding a onesie that said, "Coming soon." Stefan stood beside her with his hand on her belly, smiling in a way Lena had never seen during their entire marriage. Lena read the announcement and felt the ground shift. 3 babies lost because of Stefan's violence. 3 children who never breathed. And now Katrin would have what Lena never could. In late February 2019, Lena walked into a sporting goods store and purchased a handgun. She visited a shooting range twice. The clerk who sold her the weapon would later testify she seemed calm, polite, nothing unusual. On March 13th, Lena sent a text to Katrin. "We should talk, just us. I want to apologize. Can you come tonight?" Katrin showed Stefan, who was suspicious, but Katrin felt guilty. She owed Lena this much. Stefan agreed to wait nearby in his van. At 7:30, Lena placed the gun in a drawer beside her sofa. At 8, Katrin arrived, 20 weeks pregnant. They talked. Lena asked, "Did you know what he did to me?" Katrin didn't understand. Lena told her everything. The beatings, the 3 miscarriages caused by violence, the hysterectomy. Katrin's face transformed. She said she didn't know, that Stefan had lied. Lena said, "And you believed him." Katrin stood to leave. Lena reached for the drawer. The first shot struck Katrin in the chest. Stefan heard it from outside and ran in. Lena fired twice more. Both fell. Lena sat between the bodies through the night. At dawn, she drove to St. Nicholas Church and waited. Police found her there praying. She said 5 words. "I know, I've been waiting." The trial came in February 2020. The prosecution argued premeditation. The defense argued trauma and breaking point. Medical records documented years of abuse. Lena testified for 6 hours, explaining everything. The jury deliberated 14 hours. Verdicts: voluntary manslaughter for Stefan, second-degree murder for Katrin, feticide for the unborn child. Sentencing: 40 years in prison, eligible for parole after 27. Lena would be 62 years old. She accepted the sentence without expression and was led away in handcuffs, past cameras and families and spectators who had watched her story unfold. She didn't look back.